Mr. President, do not come to Chicago. As chaos takes over, governors rise to resist presidential tyranny. Welcome to Law and Society. Today we're going to talk about how the governors of various Democratic states are taking control of the narrative, reclaiming reality, and reminding Donald Trump that his power is not unlimited. So before I go into the meat of that, I want to remind you of a few other stories that we should be mindful of. Donald Trump has allegedly fired Lisa Cook, who's a Federal Reserve governor, who cannot be fired without cause. And what cause means, for cause means, has not really been litigated all that much. So, and then Governor Cook says that she's going to continue to serve the Federal Reserve and do her job from as she has been doing since she was appointed in 2022. We'll have in one of the cases by the Supreme Court about firing for cause employees in other departments. The Supreme Court on its own said that the Federal Reserve, is a different story, and the rules that in that case they were delivering would not apply to the Federal Reserve in terms of the president being able to fire employees from regulatory agencies that say for cause, but still, the president can do it. That's what the Supreme Court said, but not in the case of the feds. So we're going to have to see what happens in the courts. As far as we know, for now, the federal precedent is the Supreme Court saying that the Federal Reserve is an exception to any other regulatory agency, and therefore the president cannot interfere in Federal Reserve matters without showing of proper cause. That's one thing. Second, I want to talk briefly about the insanity that's going on with Kilmar Abrego Garcia. So he was brought back from El Salvador, then he was charged with smuggling crimes in Tennessee, then he was kept in custody for a while so as to not deport him to a third country. Then he went to his immigration hearing in Maryland a couple of days ago, or was it yesterday, and then he was taken into custody again by ICE, and this time they're going to send him to Uganda in Africa, which is on a different continent, across the ocean from where this man is from. Where this man has legal immigration status to live, and where he resided for so many years before he was picked by ICE, and now he's being made an example of. Donald Trump's regime does not have the courage to stand up and say, yeah, we made a mistake with Mr. Garcia. We are going to, let his immigration process go as planned. We're going to let him stay. No, they took him into custody again to send him to Uganda. And now there is a habeas corpus petition that has been filed in the District of Columbia and District of Maryland, I think, and Judge Sinis, who was the same judge who was dealing with the Tren de Aragua removals to El Salvador, she is now going to deal with this case of Abrego Garcia's habeas corpus petition. And I would hope that she would block Garcia from being sent to Uganda. Now, that should drive every single person insane that they're doing this to this man. And I hope that there is a civil case that Mr. Garcia has filed, and I really do hope that he can get the sort of compensation that he is owed for this type of harassment by the federal government without any showing of probable cause or by any other legal standard that he did anything wrong and he was here legally. Now, we have to follow that case. We're going to have to see what happens with, whether the DHS defies Judge Sinis's orders again or not, if there's court defiance. Because, here and there, court defiance is happening everywhere in increments or as a whole. And in many instances, it's being encouraged or at least being condoned by the Supreme Court itself, which is a kind of a really ominous place to be. The next thing is about next thing I want to briefly talk about is about Stephen Miller talking about how the Supremacy Clause, nullifies all other state laws, and whenever the federal government goes into the state, they can do whatever they want because whatever law that they come in with, overrules all other state law. That's not how the Supremacy Clause works. The Supremacy Clause works in a specific way, saying that if there is a state law that directly goes against a federal regulation, a federal law, or if it goes against the Constitution of the United States, in both those instances, the Supremacy Clause, the Supremacy Clause says that the state law is preempted by the federal law. The federal law wins. But in instances where there has been no congressional legislation on a matter, and mind you, no regulation, because regulation means that has been congressionally enacted and signed into law, Donald Trump is using his executive orders in order to invade states to go after migrants, homeless people, and mentally ill people. And there's no law that says that states cannot safeguard and provide sanctuary to people who are refugees, people who are legal immigrants, people who are DACA dreamers. And there's no federal law that says you cannot do that. There are federal immigration laws that says you can go and round these people up and make them go through the due process that is owed to immigrants, and then decide whether they should be deported or let them stay in the United States. But that's a whole different story than picking them up, disappearing them, putting them in detainment, and depriving them of basic due process. So, when all of that is happening, it is the federal government that is violating the Constitution. And states are in the right because they are saying that the federal government is overreaching and violating the Constitution under the 4th, 5th, 14th Amendments. And so Stephen Miller talking about all state laws going away because the president identifies one law by which he can go after, say, immigrants under the Immigration and Naturalization Act, does not mean that the states or the cities cannot have sanctuary laws that don't contravene any federal regulation or / legislation that says, no, you cannot have sanctuary cities. Because the Immigration and Naturalization Act doesn't say that, doesn't prohibit that. specifically. You see, it has to be on a specific matter that there's a collision between this a federal and a state law. So, with that said, I wanted to sort of go into how Donald Trump is positioning himself. He's saying Americans apparently want a dictator. Maybe a small minority of us do, but a vast majority of us don't. And he says he's not a dictator. He's a person with common sense and a smart person. Yeah. You see, corporate media has normalized extremism to make it seem like this madman is normal. And we are suffering because when he says nonsensical stuff like that, nobody goaded him to call himself a dictator or to say whether America wants a dictator or not. He just said it. And his actions are very much akin to what a wannabe dictator or a fledgling dictator would do. You know, in the red states, he's directing red states like Texas, which has now signed into law a redistricting, and deploy various other states deploying, red states deploying their National Guard to Washington, D.C. Those states themselves being open to federal control of state resources. That's a problem that the citizens of the red states will have to deal with. The problem will arise when there is any blue jurisdiction in these red states that are sanctuary jurisdiction. And the question will rise whether cities can invoke 10th Amendment right or whether only state authorities can. Because, you know, the state is not going to help that sanctuary jurisdiction, not in the red states. But now in the blue states, something big is happening. It's being led by Governor Newsom, who is reclaiming reality by making it clear how insane Donald Trump is. And then by that mockery and satire, disrobing the insanity and showing the real danger of where we are going, which is that Donald Trump is waging war on America, on every sector, from agriculture, food production, to education, to national defense, to every sector that you can think of, Donald Trump is attacking. And in the context of redistricting, in the context of a police state, California is battling Donald Trump in the courts. And because Donald Trump's campaign in LA was such an abysmal failure that the courts essentially wiped having raids. So there are still raids happening. And if they happen in the Central District of California, they need to be taken to court because they are in violation of a Ninth Circuit federal regulation, ruling that says that illegal raids that don't follow reasonable suspicion and basic immigration policies are stopped. You can't have those raids happen in the Central District of California. Now, the same thing is Donald Trump is, now that he has sort of, solidified his posse of, which is different from posse comitatus. Posse meaning is red governors who are sending him the National Guard and who are not going to, get in the way of him coming into their states. You have on the other side, Gavin Newsom leading the movement by suing the federal government and saying the Guard's federalization without governor's consent and using it for active policing and enforcement is a violation of the Posse Comitatus Act. So, and then you have Mayor Wu of Boston bringing up anti-commandeering protections federal agents come into the cities and states and tell city and state officials what to do in imposing federal regulations. What regulations they're going to come, that depends on what regulation Donald Trump invokes when he sends these people to, sends the Guard or sends DHS to Illinois. And you have, these states, Chicago, Illinois, has the protection of the 10th Amendment anti-commandeering protections, where federal government cannot come in and commandeer state resources and change how states run their business in law enforcement and in applying the laws of their states that, again, don't contravene federal law, that are based on Donald Trump's executive orders and invocation of emergencies without showing of any actual fundamental emergency that calls for the deployment of federal forces to these states. So we are going to have, Governor Pritzker said, Mr. President, do not come to Chicago. You're neither wanted here nor needed here. And I'm paraphrasing now, he said, you are not fit for the auspicious office you occupy, callously deploying military as pawns in your ever more alarming grabs for power. So, and then Governor Pritzker advised Illinoisans and Chicagoans that when you protest, do it peacefully. Keep up the legacy of nonviolent resistance that Chicago is known for. Do not attack the Guard if they are federalized and deployed. It's not the Guard's fault. Governor Pritzker will never give that order. Governor Pritzker will take that to court if Illinois Guard is federalized without governor's consent. And it's brought to Illinois and Chicago's streets. Wes Moore, the governor of Maryland, said, if you aren't willing to walk our cities, keep our name out of your mouth. And so you see, then you have Governor Kathy Hochul coming out and saying that she is considering redistricting options, and so is Wes Moore. And Governor Pritzker pledges to fight fire with fire, and he is also considering redistricting options with the legislature. I think all blue states need to put it to a vote referendum this November for the people of those states to decide whether or not gerrymandering should be taken out and actual independent commission of redistricting must happen in an urgent manner before the 2026 elections, not only because it is better for democracy and the public policy of direct democracy, and, it is necessary because you have the president, who doesn't have any constitutional power to interfere in elections, going into the states, red states, and telling them to redistrict at a time when you are not supposed to redistrict. You're supposed to redistrict every 10 years. It happened in 2010. It happened in 2020. It'll happen again in 2030 after the censuses. But the president doesn't have any power to tell states what to do with elections, nor interfere, nor advise like he has with Greg Abbott. Remember, the difference between what Texas has done and what California has done is California has passed a law to put it to a vote in November of whether or not to redistrict. What Texas has done has passed a law to redistrict. They have bypassed the popular sentiment on what the people think about redistricting. That's a fundamental difference between the two. And I believe if you bring it to court, if red states try to bring it to court, they will be failing the argument if they have Texas, which follows the directive of the president unconstitutionally, whereas California puts it to the people. I will say this, that if you come to Chicago with love in your heart, Chicagoans welcome you. But if you come with force and animosity, Chicago will become a fortress that you cannot penetrate. And that's how Chicago works. It is a colorful quilt that sticks together. And, I want to talk briefly about a few other things. There's no national prohibition against immigration policies, as I was talking about earlier, in terms of commandeering. I want to go back and sort of reinforce that are policies that are created by states and local authorities, these sanctuary policies. While the feds can assume jurisdiction on immigration grounds, they cannot force state or city police to help them execute their federal objective. In fact, local and state police should protect local and state interests based on local and state law. If that means they have to stop federal encroachment from happening, because that is what the federal government is doing under the direction of an executive order without invoking any law other than the immigration laws, when they go after, say, homeless people or criminal, sort of mentally ill people. They're not going after the criminals, though. Even with these red states sending up their National Guard, their own states' murder rates and crime rates are like twice or three times as high as Washington, D.C. So it doesn't make any sort of sense. So there is no law that contravenes federal law, because there is no federal law that says you cannot have laws making sanctuary jurisdictions. There hasn't been a law like that. So there's no national prohibition on sanctuary city legislation. Therefore, supremacy clause isn't an issue. Likewise, there's no prohibition on homeless and mentally ill. Additionally, Donald Trump's executive orders are neither law nor coherently specific. They are vague and overbroad, based loosely on assertions that haven't been proven before by any fact-finding court or entity. Therefore, invocation of any regulation or law is equally vague and overbroad without a factual determination to ensure those laws apply. So Donald Trump will have to go to the courts and exercise, try to exercise his sort of federal authority, using the weight of the supremacy clause, then defending and saying that they're not illegally commandeering. Then they have the hurdle of the posse comitatus, despite the fact that posse comitatus has various exceptions to it, and invocation of immigration law may as well be interpreted by courts to be such an act of Congress that sort of bypasses the posse comitatus act. That depends on how the judges and the judiciary interprets that, and that remains to be seen. But I believe that the executive orders, if they are coming to Chicago or to any other blue jurisdiction, Baltimore, it'll be very interesting if they end up in Atlanta, because Georgia is a purple state with a red governor and two blue senators, and that would be an interesting bet. But that would be really a test of 10th Amendment and whether the state asserts its 10th Amendment autonomy or not, and if not, whether the cities can, whether Atlanta can do it or not. But in Chicago and Baltimore, he is not welcome, And not only will there be peaceful protest, which Governor Pritzker, my governor, encourages peaceful protest, no violence. That includes don't throw a sandwich. Eat the sandwich. Give yourself energy so you can shout more, so you can act out more. But don't physically assault the police forces, even, and the National Guard especially, because they're not the enemy. They're there following this illegal federalization that's happening if they get to Illinois streets. But your peaceful protest is very much constitutional. And the National Guard does not have the power to stop you. If they start doing that, then Illinois goes to court. If they start doing that, the public gets roused even more. There are many aspects to this. There's the legal pushback, there's the political pushback, then there's the popular pushback. And in a city like Chicago, you better believe there will be pushback. With that said, I want to remind everybody that, I believe that there has been a subpoena that has been issued by Congress for Epstein's birthday book to see the verity of, Donald Trump's birthday card. We have to follow that story because we need to make sure that all the Epstein files are released so the stories of the survivors and the victims can be told and believed. Let's talk, don't forget about the cuts being made by our government to the environment, to the federal officials in institutions like the Social Security Administration, thereby making it difficult for people receiving Social Security to access the Social Security Administration and get the paperwork done to get the money that they have earned for decades. You talk about different bans on trans people in the military. That is almost certainly a violation of the 14th Amendment, especially when you are denying them retirement benefits. You have the cuts to Medicaid that will hit rural hospitals. You have the cuts to federal food assistance SNAP programs. You have cuts to the education budget that comes with federal dollars that would fund farms to produce fresh produce and supply produce to school districts to be able to provide fresh and healthy food to lower income groups. While all of this is happening, the tariffs are causing prices to go up. Grocery prices are going up. Electricity prices are going up. We have chaos that's happening around the country, and Donald Trump and his MAGA supporters keep on saying that everything is fine. It's one of the most absurd things. With so many things facing us, it is important for us to talk about them all, but also to focus back on the acute issues of the police state, of the redistricting war, the scandal of Epstein that reflects on the moral character of MAGA, of Donald Trump, and the Republican Party, which has now become a party that is obstructing the release of the Epstein files, something that they were in favor of before 2024, before the 2024 elections. Now, always remember that this police state that's coming, if you are a citizen of Chicago, if you're a resident of Chicago, if you love Chicago, if you consider your home to be Chicago, you have a right to protest peacefully if you see military on our streets. Make sure your protests are peaceful. Make sure you organize. Always good to be part of an organized protest, or join an organized protest, or in mass rallies. And these are important But always remember, peacefully. At the same time, governors like Westmore and Kathy Hochul and Governor Pritzker and Governor Newsom are going to keep hitting back. And now they're hitting back with the leadership of Governor Newsom. The blue governors are hitting back. You are not welcome in Chicago. You are not welcome in Baltimore. If you're not willing to talk about it, if you're not willing to walk the cities, don't talk about us. Don't bring us up. You have this momentum growing, and I am heartened by it because this is the fight that we need. This is not resistance. This is showing the democratic power of states. With the redistricting war happening, it is showing that we can push back the same way. And when it goes to court, we have the better argument because we are going towards the public interest of preserving democracy, while the other side is taking the choice away from people without putting it to the people. And that we need to push as hard as we can and as far as we can in order to make a level playing field so the elections are not warped in a way so as to disenfranchise a majority of the American people, which is what has happened for years on end, and Republicans and Democrats have done that, but the extent to which Republicans do it is really malicious. And the extent to which Democrats do it has been largely responsive. And also by how the populations live. Because the blue states have independent election commissions. Now, with redistricting, with the police state coming at us, state governors have to become the fortress that stops the federal government from encroaching. Politically, by talking about it, by energizing the crowd, legally, by going to the courts and bringing up the Posse Comitatus Act, bringing up the anti-commandeering laws, bringing up state autonomy and state authority absent any regulation law that says you can't have sanctuary cities or that you cannot go after the mentally ill and homeless in the manner that you are. You know, you cannot confine them without, without due process and without cause. I mean, that's a habeas petition every time you put a homeless person behind bars. That's where we are. And I've already crossed 30 minutes, but I wanted to talk about all these things. And it's impossible to not talk about them because they're happening every single day and they develop incrementally. But overall, we are so neck deep in this war where Donald Trump is trying to turn our country into an authoritarian police state with fascist tendencies as it reaches into the private sector, trying to take control and making sort of sycophants out of captains of industry and wresting control. I don't think it's socialism or communism as much. Countries and authoritarian regimes that have called themselves communists and socialists are really far from the actual theoretical meaning of socialism or communism, which bases itself on the well-being of the masses. Fascism, however, exclusively deals with, keeping power with an iron fist by one person who then has a cadre, retinue of these private enterprises, and then you have state control going into those enterprises, and then you have the political retinue where you have the oppressive state by what we're seeing in America is redistricting. You see it in Russia. I don't know how they do it, but there's an opposition there that they have been successfully been able to shut down and mute or throw off the balcony. We aren't there yet, but we are definitely headed in that direction if we don't keep speaking up, if we don't protest, if we don't do what we can do to keep our republic. Thank you for listening. Please like, share, and subscribe, and I'll